What's up, guys? It's Bolt, and I'm back with another Remnant 2 build guide. And in this video, we're gonna go over my Archon mod mage build. Now, there was a lot of controversy with me and the other hardcore playtesters regarding mod builds. We were very skeptical about the power of them. As you guys know, in Remnant 1, mod builds were pretty much meta a good amount of the times. The mods in Remnant 1 were insanely strong, and if you guys remember, I was notorious for making one of the most busted builds in Remnant 1, the Desert Mage build, which can be seen on this channel. Just go through my Remnant 1 videos. But anyway, so as a playtester, we did not have access to Archon. So I did not want to give up on mod builds until I had the ability to play Archon. And let me tell you guys, I finally got Archon, maxed it out, and mod builds are still good. They are not meta in this one. Range builds are overall superior, but mod builds hold their own, and in certain situations they outdo range builds. Now, the majority of the enemies in Remnant 2 have weak spots. This was not the case in Remnant 1, which is why mod builds shined. So for mod builds, you do not hit weak spots. That is not the objective of them. The precision of weak spots goes to range builds. So you want just big damage while not even having to aim, precision, none of that. That's where mods excel. And in this game, you have enough tools to make mod builds work. And I'm going to show you just how. And without further ado, let's get into it. Alright guys, so first things first, I'm going to show you how to use the Alpha Omega mod beta ray. So when you're dungeon clearing / world clearing, you could shoot an enemy one at a time as such, and then use the switch weapons button to detonate. And they'll all die. And you see the dots right here? That will passively generate mod power. When you're fighting a boss, you want to apply all 3 charges because you get a 50% damage boost. So you want big damage, and if you crit against the boss, when you crit, you could get upwards of almost 7k damage. Is absolutely absurd. It's beautiful. I love it. But this build does have quite a bit of a skill ceiling because there's just a lot going on. You have to be constantly aware of the bottom right corner of your screen to know what mod you have charged and which you don't, because you're constantly switching. So, for example, let's say we're fighting a boss. You're going to apply all 3 charges. Switch, helix missiles, switch back, and you're just constantly switching, guys. And it's gonna look like that. And while you're moving and dodging, there's just a lot going on. And in between, maybe you could squeeze in a charged melee attack with your smolder to generate more mod power like that. And you just keep cycling, guys. That's the key, is cycle. But I recommend when you're in a boss fight and you have the ability to apply all 3 charges, do so for that extra 50%. It is difficult when you're from distance or if you're fighting a nimble enemy to shoot this mod, by the way. It has low firing rate, low projectile rate rather. The projectile is very slow. And it takes a while for the reticle to collapse and tighten its spread. So if you just shoot immediately, it is not accurate. As you saw in my Nightweaver fight I posted earlier this week, I miss a lot of shots because I was shooting it rapidly, as it takes a bit of time for the reticle to close. Keep that in mind, and keep in mind that it does have a slow projectile speed. So sometimes you may have to lead your targets. That's it. That's how you play this build, guys. Alright guys, starting things off with the world clearing / dungeon clearing version of the build. We're going to start by slotting in our primary archetype, which is going to be Archon. And this is because of the Tempest Prime perk. The whole objective of this build is to generate as much mod power so we can spam these mods so much, and Archon's Prime perk does just that. So it's mandatory that we have this as our first slotted archetype. Our second archetype is going to be the Medic. And this is because we're a little glassy here. We don't have much healing as we are using the Runed Heart. So Medic allows us to get a little bit more juice out of that Runed Heart with the Triage perk, plus Medic does have a few helpful healing skills that we could utilize. But also, guys, the Medic gives a 25% damage buff to all sources of damage. So this is going to buff our mod damage as well. So this is great for mobbing, guys. Pairs really nicely with the Archon. Next up, we're going to discuss the skills for mobbing. I recommend for Archon, when you're mobbing, you're going to use Reality Rune or Havoc Form. Up to you, but Reality Rune is great if you're in a jam, you get surrounded by enemies, which you hardly shouldn't because of the mods on this build that could disperse enemies so quickly. This is probably one of the strongest builds for world/dungeon clearing. But if you're in a jam, Reality Rune is great. And Havoc Form is great also if for some reason you depleted all of your mods and you're in a oh crap moment. You know, activate Havoc Form and dispatch all your enemies. And Havoc Form is really good for the enemies on the road that are shielded, or shielded enemies in general, like in the Labyrinth, because shock damage depletes shields almost instantaneously, so that's also nice to have. Keep that in mind. For the armor, guys, I always leave this up to you. I wore what I think looks cool for the theme of this build, but up to you. If you want more damage reduction, you go heavier. If you want light roll, then obviously go lighter. Next up, the Relic. Ruined Heart. We went with the Ruined Heart because it pretty much, actually it does, give you all of your mod charges when you're depleted. Amazing, amazing, guys. Don't worry about the low heal with Medic. It does heal a bit more, so it's not terrible. And as for the fragments, we went with the mod damage. We went with elemental damage because for some reason elemental damage is scaling with all mods, not just elemental mods, all mods. I don't know if it's intentional or not, but it's double dipping, so we're using that. But even if it wasn't, we would keep it because of the burn dots we will be applying. It will be increased. And we went with the Mythic mod cost because we want to spam mods as much as we can. Onto the trinkets. Detonation trigger, staple. We're using explosive mods here, guys, and this will buff our explosive mods by 25%, as well as applying a burn dot. Now, the burn dot is going to passively generate mod power for us, and this all stacks, guys. Burn of the Follower and the Tempest perk all increase the mod gen from the burn dot. So this is a staple in the build, so we can continuously spam these mods. Amazing, great combo right here. Next up, we have Burden of the Destroyer. Great ring for this specific build because we are not even going to feel the range penalty from this, guys. That's because we are not even shooting our guns on this build. The only time I shoot my gun on this build is by accident. I think I have the mod equipped and I shoot it and I'm like, oh, I shot my gun and not the mod, because you generate mod power that much. So this is amazing. This ring is going to give us a 15% damage increase to our mods without even negatively affecting us. Next up, Burden of the Gambler. We are not using a range build, guys. Range builds are the king of weak spots. Mod builds do not weak spot. So forgo the weak spots, go crit. The best way to always increase your damage in Remnant is to increase your crit chance. And if you're not weak spotting, Gambler is the best ring in the game. So definitely gotta go there. We want those big crits for our explosions to do that big damage. Crit chance all the way, guys. Next up, Burden of the Follower. Needs no introduction. Probably the best mod gen trinket in the game that's working properly. We are not using Stone of Malevolence. The Fair and Phelan sigils, Shiny Hoglore, those are all bugged and are generating absurd amounts of mod power, which is unintentional and it will be fixed eventually. But with this ring, we pretty much have constant uptime with our mods, so we are good to go. And again, guys, this all stacks. The burn dots, the prime perk, all this stuff stacks for some insane mod gen. And then finally, one of the best damage rings in the game, since we are going to be critting. We want those big juicy crits from our mods. We went with the probability cord, and you will see you will see that some of these crits are from Alpha Omega is hitting for close to 7k. It's absolutely insane. So go with the probability cord as your final trinket. Now on to the star of the show, which is Alpha Omega. For the mutator, we went with Harmonizer. Increases our mod damage for this weapon mod by 20%. Beautiful. And then on top of that, it's going to generate 25% for our stowed firearm, which is lovely because the beta ray generates its own mod power. So we're giving some love with Harmonizer to the Helix missile. So very good mutator there. And then we went with the short shot for our secondary. You guys could use whatever you want, but I do recommend the short shot because if you are going to fire your weapon for whatever reason, You do not want the firing rate nerf from Burden of the Follower, and single shot weapons do not get that firing rate nerf. As long as you manually reload, shoot, and then reload, press the reload button yourself, you will not feel the detriments from the Burden of the Follower ring. And then, of course, we went with the Helix missiles. Amazing, amazing mod for mobbing, guys. And if you're not fighting an armored enemy, it is just straight up crazy damage. Very low mod charge, so you get some spammability, which is beautiful. But this is great when you're in surrounded in a jam, because the missiles explode and seek out the other targets. So great mobbing tool and a great bossing tool as well. As long as the enemy is not armored, because Helix missiles for some reason are not bypassing armor. Explosives should, I mean, actually, all explosives are supposed to bypass armor. For whatever reason, Helix missiles is not. So it is what it is. Well, we have a remedy for that situation coming up in another variation of the build. But yeah, guys, this is the world clearing / dungeon clearing variation of the build. Alright, guys, so here is the boss killing variation of the build, and the biggest change here is for our second archetype, we have now slotted in the Challenger. This is because we want that 35% increased damage. We're going to be up close and personal when we use this build. We have the movement speed. We're just going to go on the fly, swapping mods back and forth, quick, and Challenger is there for that. On top of that, gives us a little tankiness for this, because we are a little bit glassy, but I recommend either using the Stomp skill or Juggernaut. Rampage does not work on this build, so forego that. Juggernaut is nice if you want the increased movement speed and the damage reduction, which is recommended because, like I said, we are a bit glassy with this build, guys. And War Stomp is there if you just want a little extra damage while spamming. You could cycle in your War Stomps in between skill spams, so really nice. Next change that we have is, instead of Burden of the Destroyer, we have Akari Warband. Now, for most boss fights, guys, you will be perfect dodging. I say this in every video, so this is one of the best boss killing rings in the game. We will be perfect dodging a lot. Again, a perfect dodge is when you use your iframes to avoid an attack. And guys, I know you're using your iframes to avoid attacks constantly, so go use Akari Warband. If for whatever reason you're in a fight where you're not perfect dodging much, then go back to Burden of the Destroyer. These are the only two rings that should be on this boss killing build. Now the changes to the Archon skill is going to be Chaos Gate. So what Chaos Gate does is going to increase our damage by 15% if we're in the gate, and it's going to increase our mod gen even more for more spammability. Keep in mind, guys, that we will be taking more damage in here, though. So this is a kind of risky. If you're confident, then use this. If not so confident, then go with Havoc Form or the other skill, the slow one. So Chaos Gate is nice, increase in damage, and I do recommend you guys to give this a try so you could get that huge damage output from your mods. Okay, so this is the final variation of the build. This is the variation you're going to use if you're fighting an enemy that is in the water or is heavily armored, or a combination of both. Because detonation trigger burn dots do not work on enemies in the water. So if you're fighting Talratha Metaphysical or Abomination or Quayla, even though I did use detonation trigger in my Quayla fight in this vid, but I kept her right in the beginning area, and I don't recommend that unless you're like highly skilled or crazy like I am. So this is a very interesting necklace right here. Toxic Release Valve. Now, at first you're going to read it, you're going to be like, what the heck? This build is all about swapping back and forth between your weapons, constantly swapping mods. So while we swap weapons, we're going to create that toxic cloud around us, and it's going to apply corrosion. Now, corroded enemies are going to be taking 10% more damage. And currently, Toxic Release Valve isn't applying the correct damage numbers. It's supposed to be multiplicative, and right now it's not. So it's going to be even better when they fix it, and it's still pretty damn good. So on top of that, remember, we rely on the dots for mod gen. So if they're going to be corroded, there's going to be a dot on them constantly. So we get that replacement from the burn, but now we have it with corrosion, and it works beautifully, guys. Really fun necklace. Highly recommend this when you're fighting against enemies in the water. And for the armored enemies, we're going to go with the Skewer 2.0. This has very good armor piercing capabilities. Doesn't get affected by it. It's nice damage. Not as strong as Helix in my opinion when you target a non-armored enemy, but this is a great alternative and you will see some nice damage against those armored enemies. I also forgot to mention my melee weapon and my mutator for my secondary. As for the melee, this is pretty much optional, but I went with Smolder because the burn dot from Smolder will provide us with nice mod gen when we do the charge attack. I tested it and it provided more mod gen than the Labyrinth staff, so this is why I went with that. And I would normally go with Transference, but I tested that and it was not working, so I just went with Reinvigorate, but feel free to add whatever mutator you want on your melee weapon. And as for the mutator on our secondary, we went with Feedback. Using this weapon's mod generates 20% of a single charge value as passive mod gen over 10 seconds, and it does not stack. So this is just going to further increase our mod spammability. And at level 10, you get the mod damage generating 10% of the damage as mod power. So very nice for mod gen. Alright, so for the trait allocation, we have the Flashcaster and the Strong Back / Triage traits maxed out due to their respective archetypes. And thanks to a YouTube comment who recommended that I use Swiftness, I fell in love with this trait and I'm probably going to use it on almost all of my builds now. It is amazing, just the nimbleness to get out of harm's way. It helps so much just to traverse the worlds. Highly recommend this trait. We always go with Vigor maxed out. Endurance, we only went with half. The YouTube comment also kind of reviewed my gameplay and recommended that I didn't need as much endurance as I thought I did. Same with recovery, we only went with half. So I've been messing around with it, experimenting with it, and it actually seems to be serving me just as well. And I think it's thankful to the Swiftness trait where I could get out of harm's way a bit quicker and faster. Spirit is the king of this build as it gives us more mod gen. Expertise, so we could get our skills up quicker. Here's a new one, guys, Amplitude. This is because it increases the AoE size of our skills that we're using on this build, and it also increases the AoE of the Toxic Release Valve, which is one of the build variations that I have here. So really nice trait that is going to give you some nice quality of life for the stuff we're using. Again, recovery, we only have it at 5 right now, but it's serving us well. And you guys know I am a relic abuser. I love the relic perks on the archetypes. So I always, well, pretty much always max out my glutton trait because it is just so useful. Now, a little tip. I recommend you guys use the Bottled Shadeberry, which is going to give you 10% extra mod gen for 60 minutes, and also the Fairy Needle, which is going to give you 10 mod power per second for 60 seconds. All this stuff stacks, guys, remember, with the Archon skill and the Burden of the Follower, so the mod gen is pretty ridiculous when we have all of this stuff combined. Alright, so that sums up the build. I know, this build is crazy, there's a lot going on, and it's going to take a while for you guys to get used to this kind of playstyle, but guys, I encourage everybody to practice and give it a try, and in no time you'll be a mod swapping mage like the best of them. Keep in mind, guys, I do recommend mod builds only against enemies who are not going to have easily accessible weak spots, or bosses or enemies that do not have weak spots, or for mobbing and world clearing. Guys, this is probably the best dungeon clearing / world clearing build. You're going to have such an easy time just traversing through worlds, just deleting mobs, trash mobs so easily with these things. And then the constant uptime with your mod gen is just, it's absolutely ridiculous. You're going to have 0 issues. So, non-weak spot bosses, dungeon world clearing, siege events, bod builds, hands down, are the king. Everything else goes to the range builds. Unfortunately, there's 2 kings of this castle, the weak spot king and then the non-weak spot king. And that's how it was at Remnant 1. And the same goes for this. It just so happens that there are more weak spot enemies in this game. So hey, slight edge to range builds, but guys, don't let these mod builds down. Give it a try. But hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please like, share, subscribe, comment, all of that good stuff. It really helps me out. Be on the lookout for more build guides, boss kills, streams, and just overall amazing Remnant 2 gameplay. But until then, I'll catch everyone on the next.